Welcome to your Hope-Filled Perspective with Dr. Michelle Bengtson. I am delighted that you have decided to spend a few minutes of your week with us. As a board-certified clinical neuropsychologist, not a day goes by that I don't have to address the importance of rest with my patients, from medical and mental health disorders, ranging from ADHD to post-concussion syndrome. As a society that is now driven to better and faster technology, rest has become a lost art, but no less fundamentally important to our physical, emotional, cognitive, and spiritual well-being. God has granted us both time and a model for rest for our good, yet we've come to treat it as a weakness or a punishment. If you have ever felt worn out, weary, or longing for more, then today is the perfect show for you. Scripture tells us in Isaiah 30, verse 15, this is what the sovereign Lord, the Holy One of Israel says, only in returning to me and resting in me will you be saved. In quietness and confidence is your strength, but you would have none of it. And Hebrews 4:11 says, so let us do our best to enter that rest. But if we disobey God, as the people of Israel did, we will fall. Today, we're talking about the importance of heeding God's command and gift of rest in a world that dictates busy is better. We're a society that praises being busy. The more that one can cram into a day and the fewer hours you need to sleep, the more productive and successful you seem. But are you? And at what cost? On today's show, we're going to be talking to my friend, Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith. Dr. Dalton-Smith is an author, a speaker, and a board-certified internal medicine physician. She has an active practice near Birmingham, Alabama, and she's a national and international media resource on the mind, body, spirit connection. She's the author of Set Free to Live Free and Come Empty, but her newest release is Sacred Rest, Recover Your Life, Renew Your Energy, including groundbreaking insight on the 7 types of rest needed to optimize your productivity, increase your overall happiness, and live your best life. Welcome to the program, Saundra.
Thanks for having me, Michelle.
You are an internal medicine physician. Where did your passion for that kind of work come from?
Honestly, I cannot remember another time in my life that there was any other job I ever thought about doing. Growing up, I always had this fear that death was just inevitable for every person, and that if I didn't find some way of kind of intercepting it, then I was always going to be fearful of it. And so for me, it started off with wanting to kind of get an understanding of life and death. And I think medicine really, you get a true understanding of the two. At the time, I didn't know the spiritual aspects of that, but just looking at it from a child, one whose mother died soon after childbirth, that was just very real for me. Just the reality of how do I intercept life to try to try to keep death at bay, because I didn't want anybody else to experience what I had felt growing up without a mother.
Absolutely. I realize in talking to each guest that so much of what we do and where we put our energy into comes because of some experience that we had that we're either trying to work through or figure out. So it sounds like that was exactly the case for you.
Absolutely. And like I said, at the time, I had no idea the spiritual aspect of it. It was purely just a coping mechanism. I wanted to get a hold of something that I felt powerless in the past to deal with.
In your book, Sacred Rest, you empathize with our struggle to maintain a lifestyle that includes rest, while educating us regarding the different types of rest deficit. And I loved how you wove your own story and the struggle of others throughout Sacred Rest, so that we can relate to what is truly a real life challenge to balance doing and being. Would you share a bit of the background story with us of what led you to write that book?
Yes, I started off really with the mindset that if I wanted something to happen in my life, then it was my responsibility to get it done, to do the work, to have the goals, meet every goal. I was just very plan oriented. So I was big on writing out the 5-year plan, the 3-year plan, and having that before me in everything that I did. And so I got to a point in my life where, my plan was based around developing a family and a career and having an office practice. And there was one day I came home and I really checked off all of my major life goal boxes. I had the 2 kids, I had the car, I had the house, I had the husband. All of those things were checked off, and I still felt empty. I still felt unsatisfied. I felt drained. I felt like the life that I created didn't live up to what it was supposed to live up to. And so on that particular day, I just came home and just laid out. I laid out on the floor with my kids in front of the TV. And I was just like, God, I don't want to do this anymore. If this is as good as it gets, then it's not good enough. And I don't want to do it anymore. And so I didn't have a plan. I wasn't suicidal. I was just done. I was done with my life as it was. And it was in that moment that really Holy Spirit it was one of the first times that I felt like I ending of what it felt like to feel the presence of God, because I felt like the peace and the presence of God just surrounded me on that floor, and just let me know that there is something more, but you're refusing to enter into it. Just like Isaiah 30:15 says, I was unwilling to believe that rest had a place in my life. I thought it was all about getting the work done. And so God really had to show me that in order to enjoy the life we create and the blessings he gives, we have to allow room for rest. And so as I kind of worked through that own process in my life, the whole 7 types of rest and the idea for sacred rest came into play. I don't tell many people this, but right around that time, I had just got contracted for, when I was writing the book, I just got contracted for a new book. And I really felt God said, this is not the time. This is the time for you to rest. So I had to tell the publisher, can't write this book. Tell my agent, sorry, can't write this book. And that was one of those first steps of faith that I had to take, to realize that when God gives us the command to rest, it is for our good. It's opening up room for something better, but so often we're unwilling to trust him in that process. So we keep grabbing for the small blessings when he's trying to really let us in on a really big one coming our way.
Oh, I can relate to that story in more ways than you know. I think that is a really a bent in those of us who are very achievement oriented, type A, but I see
Mm-hmm.
it in so many people in my own patient population that we treat rest as if that's an indulgence. Yet God talks about rest so often in his word. And I remember getting to a similar place where I was just done. I just couldn't do it anymore. I had made all those achievements, checked off all
Mm-hmm.
those boxes, but it wasn't fulfilling and I was exhausted. But it's interesting that sometimes God has to take us to that place where we're at the lowest of the low in order for us to hear his voice.
And that's where I felt like I got, because I don't know. I mean, honestly, it was one of those situations where I felt like it was the first time I've ever felt God's presence. But as busy as I was moving and as active as I was, God could have been surrounding me every minute of the day and I wouldn't have recognized it, because I wasn't really slowing down long enough to even appreciate or to build a relationship or to develop any type of intimacy. I had a very religious relationship with God and no true personal relationship. Because like with any relationship, you have to spend some time. And I wasn't spending any time. I was spending my time working my plan.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes our plan is good, but it's not necessarily the path that the Lord has. You know, scripture says many are the man's plans, but it's the Lord's plan that prevails. I
That is
remember
so true.
I remember after turning in my last manuscript and saying, okay, Lord, now what? What's the next book that I'm going to work on? Or what's the next project I'm going to start on? And I was all excited. And he said, no, this is going to be a season of rest.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, you know, it would be easier for me to have 3 barn burner deadlines than to do this thing that you're saying rest, but it's a command. And just like those verses I read, the people of Israel would have none of it. And I thought, well, I don't want to be disobedient because I'm going to pay the price.
hmm That's so true. And I love the scripture from Hebrews 4:11, where it does talk about, laboring to enter into the rest, because it seems like those two words shouldn't even together, that you're going to labor, or in some translations, strive to enter into the rest. But we have an enemy, and he's constantly showing us all the stuff that has to be done. And so it is very easy. And as far as society is where it is now, it is so easy to get into that mindset that if you stop, that you're either giving up on something, you're giving up on your dream if you're not pushing and grinding all the time, or you're settling for something if you're not always grasping for something more. It's a mindset, and it's hard to get people to break it, because it starts getting built into us even as teens.
It certainly does. And I look back, and I had one parent that was very much like that. And so I saw that parent live it out. And
hmm
unfortunately, he died at 42 of a major, massive heart attack.
Oh my.
So I look at that and think, I don't want that to be my lot. There has to be that balance between rest and doing what God has called us to do.
hmm
Friends, we're going to take a real quick 1-minute commercial break, but I want you to stick with us as Dr. Dalton-Smith shares more about why rest is so important and how we improve when we're deficient in that area. Welcome back to your Hope-Filled Perspective. I think that when most people hear the word rest, they think it means sleep. But you mean so much more than that. Can you explain the distinction between sleep and rest?
Yes, that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions, and it's why so many people, I think, are not getting the type of rest that they need. When I started looking at rest and doing the research, rest is it's so much more than sleep, because if you look at sleep, sleep is mainly just a physical aspect of rest. So rest, I divided it up into 7 different components. And so looking at those 7, you have physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, sensory, social, and creative. And so sleep is just one part, it's the physical part. And so if you're just trying to use sleep to help you not feel tired and exhausted and drained, then you're only treating one of the 7 types of rest that you need. That's why so many people go to bed at night, and then they wake up the next morning, they say, why am I tired? Why do I feel tired all the time, despite getting maybe 7, 8, however many hours of sleep? And that's because they're not treating these other 6 areas that sometimes are actually more depleted than you are physically. Depending on the type of work you do or the type of stressors that are in your life, you may be getting plenty of physical rest, but emotionally and socially be depleted.
So, sleeping is not sufficient in and of itself for maintaining that rest that God has called us to. Can you briefly define the other types of rest?
Yeah, I'll start with physical, because even with physical, we have 2 types. You have the passive, which is more the sleeping and the napping. And then you have the active, which has to do with really restoring circulation and muscle flexibility and the lymphatic system. So, with physical rest, if you're thinking about someone who sits at a desk all day or even has a physical job, that muscle tension they have in their neck and the soreness in the legs, getting that restored back to a restful, peaceful state with things like stretching exercises or leisure walks, something where you're not trying to lose weight, but you're just trying to get the body kind of back into balance. Mental rest, so many people deal with that. The easiest way to know that you don't have it is if you, let's say, try to lay down at night to go to sleep, and your mind is like racing. You can't turn your brain off. You're thinking about all the different stuff you need to do. So the way of getting that is just trying to make sure that you're allowing some kind of white space in your head to get your thoughts to be cleared out, so that you're not constantly dwelling on things and ruminating on ideas and behaviors. Emotional rest is the one that a lot of women tend to deal with. It's that rest that comes from being able to just be very truthful and authentic, to be able to say what you mean without having to always censor your words. And so emotional rest is usually with those people that you feel very comfortable with, that you feel secure and loved by. Spiritual rest is, as we talked about, breaking away from the religious aspect of that relationship and focusing more on the intimacy with God. time in his presence, when you're not there asking for things, but you're there to minister to him, and to make that part of your spiritual experience, that you're seeking out that type of intimacy and time in his presence. Social rest is really understanding what people are draining in your life, and which people are more life-giving, that the ones that make you feel better just by being around them. And so the rest of being with others is what social rest is. I know a lot of people, when they hear that, they think about kind of drawing away and getting away from people. That's helpful. I mean, that is part of rest, but honestly, that hits many areas, because it hits the mental, because you're able to kind of clear your mind when you don't have other people interjecting their own ideas and thoughts. But the social rest is the rest from the presence of other people. And we oftentimes as adults get away from that because we spend so much time with our family that we kind of let our friendships get pushed to the side. And it's often those friendships is where the social rest comes from, because they're not needing you like your family is. So your family oftentimes is draining, not that they're bad, they're just, they're needing things from you.
Sure.
So they're draining. And so you need those relationships where people just want to be in your presence and you be in their presence. Sensory rest is a really key one for anyone who works around like a lot of bright lights, sounds, even if you're working like in nursing or something like that, where you're touching people all the time, or a mom with small kids where you're being touched all the time. Those are all sensory inputs that can become overwhelming. If you have an anxious type personality, very easy for the extra sensory inputs to kind of put you on edge. So if you ever feel like, the second something happens, you're jumping and you're just really easily irritable, then kind of pulling away some of the sensory inputs in your life, turning off the TV if nobody's watching it, turning off the radio on the drive home, learning to appreciate silence can help restore some of that. And then the last one is probably my favorite. It's called creative rest. And it's not just for creatives, it's for everybody. But creative rest is the rest that comes from allowing yourself the space to appreciate beauty. And so whether that's in its natural form or in man-made form, like music or art, we don't allow ourselves times to appreciate beauty. And that awakens something inside of us. That's why so many of us love going to the beach, is because that appreciation, the awe and wonder that's kind of awakened inside of us when we're in that setting, restores us. And that's the mindset shift that most people have to make, is that rest is really about restoration, about restoring something inside of you in one of those 7 areas.
Wow. As you went through all of those areas, my mind went to thinking about Jesus and how often he pulled away for a time to be in his Father's presence, to get away from the crowd, to not have the demand of constantly teaching and discipling. And so I think Jesus is our ultimate model for all of those types of rest.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Some of the things that he faced were different than what we face. He didn't have the barrage of technology to worry about, but he did have people constantly needing and wanting something from him. And that was his ministry. Yet he showed us that even in ministry, it's okay to pull apart, set aside time. He slept in the boat. Like, what a perfect example of taking time to rest.
Yeah, there are so many great examples as I went through the word where Jesus it's so subtle that we miss it almost, because we look at it and we think, okay, well, Jesus was sleeping in the boat, but that's a physical need. So we physically need to rest our bodies. And even in the middle of our deepest storms, what is usually one of the hardest things for us to do is sleep. Because when you have stress and all these different things going on in your life, these different things that happen to us, the first thing a lot of people will say is, I have trouble sleeping. And so we have to understand that that's still needed. I think that's one of the greatest examples of how needed it is, that he's actually showing us that even in the middle of your biggest storm, that's still a need that you have. And so then the process is what has to happen to get you there. And so for so many of us, we turn to sleeping pills or different aids trying to help us sleep. And there's nothing wrong with using those for a season. Just like with any medicine, I think God uses it all sometimes to help us get to the place of healing. But it has to be multifaceted. And I think that's the thing. We try to just, okay, I need more sleep. but now maybe I need to figure out how to get more mental rest so that I can clear my mind to sleep. Or how do I get my tense body to unwind so that it goes into a deeper level of sleep?
Rest seems like it should be a simple process, but why do so many people struggle then with fatigue and insomnia?
I think because we don't know which type of rest that we need. For most people, we look at it and automatically we're tired. And honestly, the medical profession, we haven't helped that situation because when someone says they're tired, we automatically will tell them they need to get more sleep. And so some people, they're already getting all the sleep they can get. They're getting 7, 8 hours. And so if we don't have answers, then they just think there is no hope.
Mm.
And so that's the problem with that. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about this topic, is because there is hope. It's just we have to understand that the type of rest you need may not be the type you think you need. And that's what led to me with the whole quiz, the restquiz.com, is because I had so many people say, well, I don't know which of the rest I need. I know I don't feel good. I know I'm tired all the time, but I don't know what I need. And so once you're able to identify which of the 7 types of rest you need, you can focus your attention on getting that. And then as you start healing that area of deficit, that's when you start feeling restored. You start being able to tell, oh, my problem was I don't feel connected to people. I wasn't getting any emotional rest because I feel all my relationships are kind of the social media superficial relationships, and I didn't have those deep relationships that were healing to me, healing to my spirit and my soul. So I think that's the biggest problem for most people with that.
What are the long-term effects of focusing only on work and omitting those regular periods of rest?
It gets you to the point where life doesn't seem like it's enjoyable anymore. I feel like this is one of the big issues that we see oftentimes with people who are in the media who have very successful lives. And then you hear about them committing suicide and you wonder, how did they get to that place of feeling so low? Well, the thing is, you can be a producer of goodness. You can, like a bee, you can be constantly producing goodness in your life and never stopping to actually taste the sweetness of the life you're producing. And I think a lot of us do that. We are blessing everybody around us, but we're not allowing room and the grace and space for us to be blessed from our own work. And so that's what rest does. Rest is that opportunity for you to actually taste some of the goodness you're producing, to actually look at the blessings God's giving you and appreciate them. Because otherwise, you'll just move on to the next thing and you won't actually stay there long enough to appreciate what's happened in the process.
You are so right. I have a very good friend who frequently has to remind me to just take time to celebrate those small things before I start moving on to the next thing.
Yes, yes.
She's right, but when we're goal oriented, it's easy to check off that box and
Mm-hmm.
then start focusing on the next goal instead of taking time to relish in the goodness of
Mm-hmm.
what we've just achieved.
And I think that's the benefit of Sabbath. I know Sabbath gets kind of a bad rap now because I think the thought of taking an entire day for most people just seems unrealistic. And honestly, for some people who haven't slowed down 1 hour, it probably would be unrealistic to think they could jump into a full day. So I think for most of us, we really just have to start kind of looking at it as a lifestyle. What are some small steps I can do to start living a lifestyle of rest? And then as you start doing that, it's a lot easier to start thinking, I could actually incorporate a Sabbath day because you start seeing how rest actually helps you be more productive and actually to accomplish more because your joy level stays up, your energy level stays up, your mind stays clear, you're able to come up with ideas and brainstorm faster because your creativity is staying restored. So when you're actively filling all of these areas of rest and keeping them at their highest capacity, you become so much more effective and powerful in the kingdom because you're able to stay at the top of your game. You're not pouring out from your empty cup. You're pouring out from your overflow.
I think that was probably something many, many people needed to hear. Friends, we're going to take a 1-minute commercial break, but I want you to stick around with us as Dr. Dalton-Smith shares more about why rest is so important and how we improve when we're deficient. Welcome back to your Hope-Filled Perspective, where today my guest is Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith, and we are talking about the importance of rest. And like we were talking about before the break, we don't just mean sleep. We mean any of the 7 different types of rest. Saundra, I've heard you say that emotional rest is when you no longer feel the need to perform. Would you tell us a little bit more about that? Because for a person like me who's very goal oriented, it's hard to wrap my head around that.
I can understand. It was hard for me to wrap my head around it too, as I was walking through it, because that's been my life. As a physician, I'll give this example because my normal personality is very laid back. It's very kind of goofy. I have a tendency to tell jokes and that's just who I typically am when I'm around the people who know me well. However, in my professional persona, let's say, when I'm at the hospital, that doesn't go over well in the ICU to be someone who's telling jokes or being silly. So I'm constantly having to fight against the grain of who I naturally am. And it's not that I'm trying to be inauthentic, but I'm trying to be respectful of the role. And I think so many of us have that as part of our day-to-day life. The jobs, the positions, the roles that we have require us to fight against our normal mindset and behaviors. So we end up performing, not because we're trying to be inauthentic, but we're trying to stay within the boundaries of what's expected for that career or that position. Now, the problem with that is that that's a stress because you're having to contain who you really are. You're not being able to just let out and be natural. And so you're having to censor your words and evaluate how you say something. And it's extra stress that most of us live under and we don't really recognize. But we just know that when we get home from whatever that position or that is, you're completely exhausted from having done it. And so the problem with that is that some of us get to that point where we do it naturally. We almost forget how to be authentic because we've lived in that performance role for so long that that's just who we think we are. And so it keeps a stress on our life that we are never fully being ourselves. And the problem with that is in the back of your mind and your subconscious, it's almost as if you're telling yourself, as is, I'm not enough. And that whole sense of I'm having to be someone else to be accepted is an emotional strain. And it makes us have this negative mindset about our original design and how God initially has created our personalities and our likes and our dislikes. And it keeps us from being completely authentic with people because we fear that if they see us in our truest form, that they're not going to like us. And so true emotional rest is when you have those people. You know, Jesus had the multitude, the 12 and the 3. And I love that the 3 is the ones that he took with him to the Mount of Transfiguration, and they got to see all of who he was. Mm-hmm. And we need some people in our life that see all of who we are. The good, the bad, the ugly, no makeup, hair up in a weird ponytail at the top of your head. You know, those people who you can go on a like a girls' weekend and just be completely you. There is a healing that comes from that comes in no other form. Because knowing that you are completely accepted and loved, not just by God, but by some other flesh and blood people on the earth who are there with you, that is unbelievable. And every person should strive to have at least one person in their life where they can just truly just be themselves with.
Can you give us some examples of ways that we can add rest in the middle of a busy workday?
Yes. So most people work around computers. So I always like to use that as an example. So if you're working at a computer, let's say 5-6 hours at a day, spread in with meetings and whatever else goes on, to spend some time that you're actually analyzing what your body feels like throughout the day. So most of the studies talk about what's called flow break cycles. And the way that works is you can set a computer to do this for you, to remind you, or your smart watch or smartphone or whatever. But every 90 to 120 minutes, you basically take a break to make sure that your body's staying fluid, that you're not staying stagnant in the same position. That can include getting up to go to the bathroom, because you'd be amazed how many people don't go to the bathroom more than one time during a work day. That would be going to get water, so you're staying hydrated, but you're just making sure that you're not staying in the same position for prolonged periods of time. During those flow break cycles, what I recommend is incorporating some of the other types of rest, like physical rest, evaluating whether or not you're having pain in your neck, whether or not your eyes feel strained, whether or not you're feeling any kind of discomfort in your body. Because toward the end of most work days, people feel tired. Their body aches, their eyes are tired. But if you're confronting that throughout the day, you can quickly kind of assess, oh, I need to do some neck rolls or some stretches to loosen up my neck muscles. Or I need to do a little moment of sensory rest where I'm going to close my eyes maybe for 10 seconds or 20 seconds, just to kind of take the stress and strain of the screen off of my senses from being that staring at the computer for so long. Or if we're looking at, let's say, maybe creative rest in an office space, most of the time when we go into our offices, we bring very little that we feel is beautiful or awe-inspiring into that space with us. And so I challenge people, if you're going to be staring at beige walls all day, how do you expect to stay happy or joyful or anything staring at that? Put some artwork up, put some pictures of people that inspire you, put a phrase or a scripture, put something up that reminds you that this is not a space that you just show up to do work. This is a space you show up to create your goodness that God's given you to pour back into the world in whatever form your job is. And so put something to remind you of that, so that you're constantly filling your mind with positive and not the negative. You're constantly allowing yourself to be inspired by your surroundings and not just feel like, here we go again, I'm back at this, I'm back at this desk.
As we wrap up today's program, if a listener is struggling to get adequate rest, what hope-filled perspective would you like to offer them?
The hopeful perspective is just like it states in Isaiah 30:15, that it's a choice. I love that Matthew 11:28 says, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. It's a choice. We have to choose to accept that invitation. And once you accept that invitation, the beautiful thing is that Jesus meets us there in it. Because that whole mindset of taking the yoke, that he will take our yoke upon, we take his yoke rather upon us, is that he is so much stronger than we are. That unlike a normal situation where two things are yoked together and they share the burden, when we're yoked with Christ, we can have those times when we completely can release the load, because he is strong enough to uphold it for us.
I'm so grateful that you've shared with us today, because I think it will give our listeners some insight into areas that they can improve their life and enter into God's rest, so that we're not like those Israelites who would fail to do so. Listeners, this has been your hope-filled perspective. I pray that this has given you hope to be able to better manage your life, and instead of being so busy, that you can actually appreciate God's rest. Until next time, this is Dr. Michelle Bengtson with your hope-filled perspective. Make it a hope-filled week.